Okay, the 25th installment of the MCU in chronological order takes us to Spider-Man No Way Home, the concluding chapter of the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. And of course, this is a sequel to Far From Home, as the events of this movie take place directly following the events of Mysterio and his framing of Spider-Man as his alleged killer. Okay, so yeah, Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie had a ton of hype when it came out, mainly because of the whole multiverse stuff, and with the hope and pretty much eventual confirmation that we were going to get something special with this movie, as it was going to as it was going to bring back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. And when you watch this movie and you see how everything unfolded, Spider-Man No Way Home played like a thank you to to fans who have been following the theatrical version of Spider-Man for the past 20 years. This was like a love letter to fans like me who were 12 years old in 2002, watching that Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie for the first time in theaters and being in awe by it, and then sticking with the Spider-Man character through his many incarnations. I saw every single Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie in theaters opening day. Same thing with the Andrew Garfield movies. Even though I don't think the Andrew Garfield movies are as good as the Raimi trilogy, I still like Garfield as the character of Spider-Man, even though I think the movies he's in could have been much better written. And I overall do like Tom Holland in the role in the MCU as Spider-Man, as he brings a different as he brings a different vibe to the character by playing him more like a teenager. So so pretty much all of that is what pretty much No Way Home's all about. It's all about saying thank you for 20 years of being a loyal fan to the Spider-Man character in his theatrical form to the fans. But not only that, No Way Home is just a legitimate, really good, fun movie. This movie came out during Phase 4, and the just lack of interest that followed it. Up to Spider-Man No Way Home, you had a couple of movies like Black Widow, Shang-Chi, and the Eternals that didn't really hit with audiences. And those are movies that I've seen, and yeah, I didn't really care for them either. I mean, Shang-Chi was all right, but the Eternals was a bore. So Phase 4 to me was kind of like Phase 2, in which you had a lot of subpar movies, and you needed that one movie to really kick into high gear, or else this thing was going to be a failure. I mean, eventually Phase 4 was a failure in my opinion because a lot of it sucked. But yeah, just watching No Way Home and just being in Marvel and awed by it. Yeah, this movie brought back a lot of fun memories as to why I grew up loving the Spider-Man character ever since I was 5 or 6 years old, watching the old animated cartoon. This movie was a lot of fun. It was really a lot of fun. It felt like I was watching the Spider-Man animated series TV show in a lot of areas. You had Spider-Man teaming up with Doctor Strange and taking on the multiverse. You have a slight variation of the Sinister Six, and ultimately that's Spider-Man. That's who Spider-Man's facing off. He's basically facing off the Sinister Six minus maybe one or two people. I mean, he's very close to it. And just the references and the Easter eggs and the overall story that it tells, and how this gives the MCU Peter a complete character arc in which he finally learns what it's like what it is to be Spider-Man, and the responsibility that comes with being Spider-Man. This movie told a really, really good story. Now, is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. When you watch, now that I've seen it for now 3 times, yeah, this movie is far from perfect, and yeah, maybe the fanboy goggles really affected my viewing of it the first time around. So, with all the preliminaries out of the way, we're going to talk about Spider-Man No Way Home. So, like I said, this movie picks up exactly where Far From Home left off. Peter has been outed as Spider-Man thanks to Mysterio, and now he's got to try and find a way to clear his name, which he eventually does with the help of a nice cameo by Matt Murdock, played by Charlie Cox. But his public perception and public image is forever ruined, to the point where his friends Ned and MJ are being denied from going into MIT because of their association with Peter. So Peter goes to Doctor Strange to try and cast a spell to erase everyone's memory. Peter, who wants certain people to know who he is, distracts Doctor Strange, and he ends up accidentally sucking in people from different universes who know who Spider-Man is. And this is where we get the return of Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus, Jamie Foxx as Electro, Rhys Fiennes from the Amazing Spider-Man movie as the Lizard, the Sandman, the Flint Marko, the Sandman, Thomas Hayden Church, and of course Willem Dafoe, the great Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. All these enemies. This is like five. Like I said, this is like a Sinister Six movie, just minus maybe one character. And so you have like Spider-Man's five greatest villains across his 20-year history crossing over into this universe, and now Peter has to try and find a way to send them all back and try and just before mass chaos is created. Now, of course, during the carnage, his Aunt May kind of sort of befriends Norman Osborn, who's going through a crisis in which he's trying to fight off the Goblin persona of his side. And I like how the movie pretty much presents that. And then when the switch does happen, it actually means something. And Willem Dafoe's performance this time, and Willem Dafoe's, let's say this is his second performance in playing Goblin from like start to finish. Like, his first performance was iconic, but I think people forget that in his two other appearances, they were mostly just cameo roles. They weren't full performances. This is actually the second time that Willem Dafoe has played the Goblin in a full performance. And I think in his true second outing as the character, in terms of an actual full performance, I like this version of the Goblin better than the Raimi version. Now, the Raimi version was iconic for what it was, but it was also of the time. It was 2002. Comic book movies were really, really raw, and no one knew how to play them serious yet. Now we fast forward 20 years later. Dafoe was playing the Goblin as much more evil, much more sinister, much more creepy, much more scary. And Dafoe just owns it. You can tell this man has been waiting to play this role for a very, very long time. And the fact that a man who is in his mid-60s performed all his own stunts is admirable. Like, Dafoe, who is close to 70 years old, should not be doing his own stunts, but the man was totally game for it. And I like the fact that his only condition for returning was that he did his own stunts. Like, you gotta admire someone like that. But he absolutely killed the role as this time around as the Goblin. I love how he can go from being like charming Norman Osborn to just sinister Goblin all within this drop of a hat. It's very, very reminiscent of how Kathy Bates played Annie Wilkes in Misery. How she can just transform at just a drop of a hat and almost in a seamless fashion. It's fantastic. And I love the build-up to when the Goblin persona takes over Norman, because it incorporates Spider-Man's Spidey senses, and that's how. And I love that entire sequence is actually played out fairly well. And I like how serious and how scary and creepy it's played up. It's good shit. Oh yeah, I think No Way Home is the best directed Spider-Man movie of the John Watts trilogy. Absolutely, bar none. This is where his creativity really, really showed up. Oh yeah. Once the Goblin persona takes over, he basically convinces Electro and Sandman to pretty much stay with him and pretty much cause havoc in this new reality that they're in now. Well, Spider-Man has got to figure out a way to send everyone home. Now, of course, in the ensuing chaos, he has Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius with him, who he recreated the chip to put Otto back in charge of the tentacles, and I actually like it. I like how Otto Octavius is not a full-blown villain throughout the course of this movie. Because if you watch the Spider-Man 2 movie, Otto is a nice guy. Like, he's a really nice guy who was a mentor to Peter. And when he stops... Now, not to say that, Dr. Octopus in his bad guy form wasn't fun, because it really was a lot of fun. And I love his reintroduction when he's on the freeway where he's like, "Hello, Peter." That whole scene was fantastic, and I love it a lot. And I actually like the bantering between Molina and Tom Holland. And I like how Molina is like, "You're not my Peter Parker." I thought this stuff was actually really, really good. And maybe it's just me, maybe it's just fun seeing Alfred Molina come back as Dr. Octopus, because he was so good in Spider-Man 2. So seeing him come back was great. And I like how, once he gets the inhibitor chip and becomes good and goes from being Dr. Octopus to Otto Octavius again, he acts like a mentor to the MCU Peter Parker. I love it. It's like Dr. Octopus, in no matter any universe, was always meant to be a friend and mentor to Peter Parker. I love that. It stays true to Otto Octavius as a character when he's not Dr. Octopus, as a guy who is just a good guy at heart, whose mind was corrupted because of the tentacles and because of his overambitions. I think it's actually really well done. I like it a lot. In terms of Sandman and Lizard, hey, listen, I like the Sandman in Spider-Man 3. He's not really much of a character in this movie. He just says, I want to go home, and he teams up with Electro and Goblin at the end. Nothing really to his character. Same with the Lizard. You know, Reese Ifrins, he comes back as the Lizard. He's in Lizard Force with the majority of the movie. He has a couple of dialogue bits here and there and some funny quirks to him here and there. I like the whole running gag of Ned and MJ thinking he's a dinosaur. But as an overall character, he doesn't really do much. So he does have his has his moments in the third act and on top of the Statue of Liberty, but that's pretty much it. He's basically just a filler character, essentially. Like it's not as good as Dr. Octopus and Goblin and Electro, who have the best bits. Speaking of which, I actually like the reinvention of Electro in this movie. I mean, you get Jimmy Fox, who reprised the role, but it feels different. Like this does not feel like the Electro from Amazing Spider-Man 2. This Electro has more self-confidence, is more self-assured, and but I like it. But essentially, it's like Jimmy Fox just playing Jimmy Fox, and it's almost as if they just wanted to completely just erase the version of Electro from Amazing Spider-Man, who is not intimidating whatsoever and had no quirks to him and had very basic nerdy quirks to him, as opposed to this Electro, who looks more like he came off the cover of Maximum magazine. And I also thought Jimmy Fox was actually funny, and it was actually pretty funny in a lot of areas. Like there was one scene where Ned thinks that a tree could be a human disguised as a tree, and Electro's like, "This is a tree, man, just a regular tree." Like Jimmy Fox's Electro has a lot of funny quirks and a lot of funny moments to him. I enjoyed it a lot. I already said my piece on Dafoe as Green Goblin. I think his performance is absolutely fantastic. I love the scenes. I love how, and of course, it almost in every universe, the Green Goblin's always going to be the ultimate foe for Spider-Man and always cause Spider-Man the most grief. Especially since that Goblin essentially kills Aunt May, which kicks off the third act of the movie. And this is where the third act of the movie is where this movie, to me, finds its heart. And to me, is where the movie really gets into high gear. Like I said, the first act is really good with Doctor Strange, and of course, coming back to return as Doctor Strange, I love the comedic bantering between him and Tom Holland. I like the whole running joke of Peter constantly calling Strange Sir, and Strange saying, "Don't call me Sir," and "Don't call me Sir," because they're colleagues. But I also like the fact how there's not a father-son relationship between Spider-Man and Stephen Strange. It's more like a workplace relationship. So yeah, it's more like a workplace relationship between the two of their colleagues, essentially. I like the whole thing of, like I said, I like the whole thing of Peter constantly calling Doctor Strange Sir and him saying, "No, don't call me that. Don't call me that because we're better than that, because we have a relationship that's a little more proper than that," and stuff like that. I like the whole thing of Peter, who wanting so many people to still know who he is, causing Doctor Strange to lose his concentration and pretty much unintentionally bring in people from different universes that collide with Spider-Man. and I like the whole fight between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, where Spider-Man tricks Strange into staying into the mirror dimension by using geometry. He's able to solve the mirror dimension. He's able to solve the mirror dimension by using math in order to trick Strange. I thought that stuff was actually pretty cool and plays into the intelligence of Peter Parker as as a character himself, because Peter Parker is known for being a very smart guy. So I like all that stuff. And I also like Doctor Strange's role in the climax of the movie, where he breaks out of the mirror dimension and he pretty much, helps Spider-Man bring everyone back into their respective universes. So I think the inclusion of Doctor Strange in No Way Home is kind of similar to how Tony Stark was used in Homecoming. He's used when he needs to be used, but he's not a predominant force all throughout the movie. And I like how Spider-Man goes to him to try and cast a spell on everyone, so that way his friends can have a chance at achieving success, because of him, his guilt and for things that he's being framed for is preventing that from happening. So I like all that, and like I said, this is what sets off Peter's arc throughout the course of the movie, is that he's trying to put everyone before him. And when you get to the act, and of course when you get to the end of the third act, where Aunt May dies because of Green Goblin, She reiterates the classic, the great power comes great responsibility. Essentially, it makes sense for the MCU Spider-Man because pretty much his Uncle Ben was his Aunt May. His Aunt May was his foundation, was his rock, was his source for motivation and inspiration. So I like all that. But I also really like Tom Holland's performance in No Way Home. Like, he's still playing it as as that teenage kid. But once his aunt dies, a reality check hits him really, really, really hard. And that's where he goes from being like a bright and chipper teenager to somebody who's full of rage and full of revenge and wants to kill the goblin at any chance he gets. And this is what brings us to what everyone's been waiting for, which is the return of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire as the Amazing Spider-Man and the Raimi Spider-Man. Just seeing these three guys interact in this movie is something special. Essentially, they act like brothers when you look at it. Like Tobey Maguire is the wiser older brother who has been through a lot and has seen everything. You have Andrew Garfield, who is the misunderstood middle brother, and then you have Tom Holland, the younger brother, who is who's still trying to find himself and trying to form his own identity. And when you put all these three together in a melting pot, you truly get something really, really great. And just as a fan, it's so much fun seeing Tobey Maguire play Spider-Man one last time, and knowing that he's a more wiser version of the character, knowing that him acting like a mentor to Tom Holland was something cool. Him giving motivation to Andrew Garfield was also really cool. And just the bantering between Maguire and Garfield on top of the Empire State Building and Tom Holland, that was just a lot of fun. Them talking about their webbing and how Maguire uses how Maguire Spider-Man uses organic webbing as opposed to Holland and Garfield using pretty much creating their own webbings, and just having conversations about their experiences. Holland Spider-Man makes references to being an Avenger and fighting Thanos. We get a nice reference to Eddie Brock by Tobey Maguire when he fought an alien with black goo, and you got Andrew Spider-Man, who's kind of like left out of the picture because he's never fought aliens and stuff like that. But he is cool in his own way. Like, I love it. I thought this stuff was great. And I love how it's Ned and MJ who think that Andrew Garfield is their Peter Parker because they accidentally bring him in, and then they bring in Tobey Maguire's. And I like how these two are like the source of having MCU Peter kind of like find his way again, because they tell him stories about how Maguire Spider-Man tells Holland about how Uncle Ben died. Andrew Spider-Man tells a story about how he couldn't save Gwen. And it's good stuff, like really, really good stuff, especially for Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man, because he has a beautiful redemption arc. And I'll talk about that momentarily. I love it a lot. Now, when it comes to Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, like, he's the one who has more of the connection with Green Goblin since it's Willem Dafoe's Goblin. So I like all that stuff. Plus, we get a nice little reference when Maguire's talking to Ned about Harry Osborn and how Harry sacrificed himself to save Peter. I thought that was actually a nice little reference to Harry Osborn, and how his best friend turned into a supervillain, then tried to kill him, but then redeemed himself. It's like, I like that little nod to Harry Osborn. Give Harry some love. Give Harry some respect. So I thought that stuff was cool. I like how Andrew Garfield interacts with Electro. I thought that was pretty cool as well. That was actually really nice. We get a nice reference to Miles Morales, subtle reference, a nice undercover reference to Miles Morales. That was okay too. Where Electro's complaining, why can't there gotta be a black Spider-Man through somewhere, or whatever you want to call it, whatever, like stuff like that, whatever. Well, yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think all three Spider-Mans get their chance to shine in the climax. Of course, Holland's the one who gets the most shine because it's his movie at the end of the day. But like I said, Andrew Garfield Spider-Man gets his redemption when he saves MJ from a near death. And I love how this scene is played up. And Andrew Garfield's performance when he saves MJ, just pay attention to his facial expressions and facial reactions. It's beautiful because he did his greatest failure is what turned him into a darker version of himself. And I love the story leading up to him saving MJ, where he was like, even when Gwen died, I tried to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but I just got so full of rage, got so bitter, got so full of hate. And there was a time where I stopped being friendly and started pulling my punches and started, really hurting people. almost to the brink of death. And I like how he gets that redemption when he saves MJ, because something happens where MJ falls off the Empire State Building. Holland Spider-Man tries to save her, but he couldn't make it in time. But she's saved at the last minute by Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. And when you watch The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and how he failed to save Gwen, and then when you watch this and how he saved MJ, it's his character coming full circle. Like, he finally was able to redeem his greatest failure by essentially saving Gwen, who was his MJ. I love how the scene's played up, and Andrew Garfield's performance is just so, like, it's a tearjerker, because you feel for him. Like, he finally was able to redeem himself. And I love how it's played up. It's played up so beautifully. Now, when you get to Maguire Spider-Man, I love the reunion between him and Doc Ock, in which they recreate, and which is another, what's another great moment. And I love how it makes a nice little reference to the sun in the palm of my hand, and Doc Ock just being very thrilled to see this version of Peter. It's like I said, it's played up in a way of a father seeing his son for the first time in years, and just being very, very happy and excited to see him and know that he's doing good, and know that he's trying to be a better man and stuff like that. I love it. It's a brief few second scene, but when you watch it as a fan, and after watching the Raimi trilogy, and you follow Maguire's story from that trilogy in this movie, it's so beautiful. And I also love the last few moments with the Goblin fight. On the first Goblin fight that MCU Spidey had with Goblin was brutal. Like, Goblin kicked his ass. And then you get to the third act where the tides have turned and Spider-Man's about to kill the Goblin. But then then it's Maguire Peter who stops him, and I love it. Because Tobey Maguire Spider-Man is the only one who could have prevented this from happening, because Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, he went through a lot. He pretty much he didn't kill the guy who he thought killed Uncle Ben, but he played a role in him dying, and he lived with a lot of regret with that. He fought Goblin before, and Norman was like a mentor to him, like a father figure to him. And you have Harry, you have all the things he went through with Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2, and the stuff with Sandman as well. So it's only fitting that Maguire Spider-Man is the one that pretty much tells Tom Holland Spider-Man, listen, this isn't the way. Don't do it. And I love how that gets through him. And I also love, but I don't really care for the fake out death. I don't really care for Goblin stabbing Maguire Spider-Man and the movie almost playing it out like a death. I think that would, thank God they didn't go that far. But I love the whole scene, and it really helps shape the MCU Spider-Man more and more closer to what he's supposed to be. I love all that stuff. Like, I like how Maguire Spider-Man is the one who helps the MCU Spidey pretty much find his way and find himself again. Played very, very beautifully. And of course, Norman gets cured, and he's pretty much back to being Norman with with the Goblin gone. And then, while all this is happening, you have the ripples in the sky that are opening, and you get nice little nods and references to Spider-Man villains who to hopefully come in the future. I know one of them was in the shape of Kraven the Hunter. But essentially, Doctor Strange, he's able to reverse the spell, but unfortunately, everyone just loses their memory of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Specifically, Happy Hogan, who is featured nicely in this movie, and J. Jonah Jameson, who's also featured nicely in this movie. I don't think J. Jonah Jameson gets enough to do, but it's fun seeing J.K. Simmons. Same thing with Happy and Jon Favreau. I think Favreau gets a little bit more to do in terms of like emotional impact than JJ does. But I like the overall ending of this movie where Doctor Strange reverses the spell. Everybody forgets who Spider-Man is, even his friends. His girlfriend doesn't know who he is. His best friend doesn't know who he is. Essentially, Peter Parker now has to start all over from scratch, because now he truly has to be the hero without anyone. There's no more Tony Stark. There's no more nothing. Everything is erased. It's more or less a clean slate. And this is where the supposed Iron Boy truly does become Iron Man, especially when the last shot of the movie is him in a more traditional Spider-Man suit that was pretty much a more traditional Spider-Man suit, a la the Maguire and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans, where he was handmade and handcrafted. I love that stuff. It's nice. And of course, you get a nice mid-credit scene with Eddie Brock, Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock, having the bar in the MCU. Now, I think it would have been cooler if Venom was a part of Eddie was a part of the final act in terms of action quality. But it's fun to see him in this because it's a nice extension of the of the credit scene from Let There Be Carnage, and it gets wrapped up over here. Like I said, for me as a fan, it would have been cooler if Venom was more of a prominent character. That's just me personally, because I would have loved to have seen Tom Hardy interact with the Tom Holland Spider-Man and just all the other Spider-Mans too, because that's what Let There Be Carnage scene teased that, and then it failed to capitalize it with this. So yeah, like I said, the overall movie is fantastic. I love it a lot. Like the acting is top notch. The way they utilized, legacy Spider-Man characters, it served the story and didn't take away from the story. And the two Spider-Mans helped play a role in shaping and mentoring the Tom Holland Spider-Man into being what he's eventually going to become. I like the inclusion of Doctor Strange. I thought for the most part, Spider-Man's prior villains were utilized to the best, with Doc Ock and Green Goblin being the better utilized, and Electro having some fun bits here and there. My two big complaints are like you have Eddie Brock, and he's just there as like an extension of Let There Be Carnage, because Let There Be Carnage teased that there could be something more with that character. Instead, he's at a bar. A bartender tells him the MCU history, and then when he gets sucked back to his dimension, a piece of the symbiote is left behind, which could lead to different possibilities. Like I said, I would have liked to have seen Eddie Brock play a more feature role in this movie, particularly in the third act. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you have the inclusion of Matt Murdock, who plays Spider-Man's lawyer. Now, how I would have did the first half of the movie, I would have had the first half of the movie basically be the trial of Peter Parker with Matt Murdock as his lawyer, and you could have gotten a nice, cool scene out of a nice couple of scenes out of that. Even introduce Matt when Damage Control has Peter in custody, and Aunt May brings in Matt Murdock to defend him. Give me something, just a 1-minute cameo. I don't know. You could have made like an extended 15-minute sequence out of this, and it would have been cool. But we didn't get that. Like, those are my two biggest gripes, is that Brock and Murdock are just used as cameos, but they could be used for something so much more. And I don't think it would have taken away from the movie. I think it would have added to the movie and exponentially. So yeah, with all that being, I think there's a lot more to talk about with No Way Home, but that's just how I feel about this movie. Overall, at the end of the day, I thoroughly enjoyed Spider-Man No Way Home. I still really, really enjoyed this movie. This is still one of the best Spider-Man movies of the MCU, and just an overall fun movie that gives a nice love letter to the fans of this character and to the fan of his various live action iterations. And it also sets up for a very interesting future, because now we have a Peter Parker who is stripped away from everything, who is now starting from the ground up. So I would like to see what directions they go in when the fourth Spider-Man movie eventually comes in. And of course, I like how this movie is the official start of the whole multiverse concept of the MCU. As to how the MCU handled it, that's all up to your interpretation. I think they handled it in a very, very dumb way. But as a start, this was a good launching pad for it. So yeah, with all said and done, No Way Home to me gets a solid, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I still really like this movie. This is my favorite of the MCU Spidey trilogy. And like I said, John Watts, in terms of his directing, was more visually creative, and you can really tell he was having a lot more fun with this movie. So yeah, 9 out of 10 for Spider-Man No Way Home. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.